So this morning we are in the second part of Luke 24. Last Sunday, for the first Sunday of Easter, we read about the encounter of Mary and the other women at the empty tomb. And they went back and told the male disciples, that Jesus had risen, but they, again, did not yet quite believe. And so now we continue from there with verse 13 of that same chapter, Luke 24. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking, discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning. And when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he's appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So may God add a blessing to the reading of God's word today, and we turn back again. Do me a favor, please, if you would. Just take a moment and just take in a deep breath. Just take a moment and breathe in. Just inhale for that moment and feel that breath moving through your lungs right now, moving through your life. And then just take a moment and just say thank you. Just thank you. How many times each day do we breathe and not stop to say thanks? And just to thank God for that breath, for just that moment, for that second that we just had. One thing you learn as the older you get, that life moves really fast. Especially now as a parent, I see how fast it moves and how important it is to cherish each and every moment and rejoice in every day that we have, because every day is that moment to have an encounter with God and to see God around us and God with us. And so that's why we're here today. And again, the good news, as I shared earlier, is that Easter has not ended. Easter continues. I'm sure that all the eggs have been dyed by now and hopefully found. You don't want to find that egg in July in the couch cushion, as once happened when I was a kid. The Easter Hassenpfeffer has already hid them all appropriately. That's rabbit stew, by the way. The Easter baskets have been found and plundered. I know at our house the peeps have all been consumed, and of course the Easter outfits have been outfitted and have been a part of the Easter celebration. And I'm always glad, again, as I know some would begrudge people that come to worship just a few times a year. I think we should just celebrate any time someone's in God's house to worship. However, it's always my invitation for us that we not live a life that sees Easter for just one day. To not see Easter as just a 24-hour period set aside, but instead of Easter one day, we live Easter every day. And that's part of what I want to talk about with you today is Easter every day. Now, I do have a story to share, and again, I don't tell you it's a funny story. You decide that for yourself. I would simply tell this story. But it's a story about 4 siblings whose mother loved Easter. For her, Easter was the reason she was able to get up every day. Their father died when they were young, and so this widow had to raise her 4 children by herself, and she did an incredible job. But for her, she found her strength through the Lord in her walk with God. And Easter was what meant so much to her in her walk with Jesus. And so her children all grew up, and they all became quite successful in their own lives. In fact, one was a doctor, one was a lawyer, one was an airline pilot, and the other was a television producer. So all 4 of her children went on to these exceptional careers. And so they knew how much their mother loved Easter. Easter was such a big deal as kids that they decided one Easter they would surprise her. They would just pour upon her lavish gifts to show their love for their mother. So the one child, her one daughter, who had become a doctor, went ahead and had a mansion built for her mother. This huge house with all these rooms she had built for mother. The other child, the lawyer, had decided that their mother needed a new car. And not just any car. They bought her a Mercedes SL 600. So they bought her a fine automobile. And then the other child, the airline pilot, decided since their mother always watched movies, and especially the old classics, she had built a brand new state-of-the-art theater in her home. And so Dolby sound, everything was in the home for the mother. And then finally, the last child, her other daughter, she decided she'd do something even more special. Because I mentioned their mother loved the Lord and she loved to read her Bible. But as she was getting older, it's harder to do. And so this child found out about this particular parrot. This parrot had been taught every single word of the Bible. This parrot, for years and years, was taught every word of the Bible. And so all you had to do is say a Bible book, chapter, and verse, and the parrot would give it back to you. But this was no cheap parrot. In fact, the pastor who trained this parrot said that he would only sell it if they would pay $100,000 a year for 5 years to their church. Then they could have the parrot for her mother. But because she loved her mother so much, she knew this gift would mean so much, she decided to go ahead and she bought the Bible-quoting parrot for her mother. Well, Mom, of course, got all these gifts, and she was quite surprised this one Easter, and she was very touched by the sincerity of her children and what they did for her. But eventually, as the months went by, she sort of grew old to some of the things, and she wanted to be appreciative, but she wanted to be honest as well. So she wrote these thank you notes to her children, and she wrote to Mary, the one who built the house, thanks, I love this house, but it's so big, it's too many rooms. I'm too old and tired to clean them, so I just live in one room, but thanks anyways. To Michael, the lawyer who bought her the car, she had wrote, I thank you for this expensive automobile, but since I can hardly see, I no longer drive. And someone else goes to get the groceries for me, but you know what? The thought counts. Thank you so much. And then to Melinda, she wrote a note and said, thank you so much for the Dolby surround sound theater in my house. But since most of my friends are deceased, I sit and watch it alone. I don't really enjoy it because I can't see very well. I'm hard of hearing. But again, thank you. It's the thought that counts. So finally, she got to her dear beloved Michael, who bought her the parrot. And she wrote just that. My dearest Michael, you've always known me better than all the other children. Thank you so much for your gift. The chicken was delicious. Love, Mom. Yeah, it tastes just like chicken, right? So be careful, not just what you wish for, but what you gift to somebody else, right? But this morning, I want to spend this time with you, taking times we did last year, always the Sunday after Easter. For me, one of the best ways to really teach and share about the meaning and impact of both the crucifixion and the resurrection is through speaking about organ donation and gift of life. Now, last year we were blessed with other individuals who would share about their story. You may recall a father whose son had died after an overdose, but in their own love, they donated their son's organs to touch the lives of others. And our own Evelyn Dixon, her and her husband, are here on the first Sundays of the month, as they also belong to other churches, but they're always here at Journey of Faith. And Evelyn is a kidney recipient. Our own Jody Boone is a kidney donor. She gave a kidney to her own sister when she was in need. I know Michael Blessing, Jan Hansen's nephew, is a recipient as well of a kidney, no, a heart recipient, and he's doing much better now as well. And so there's different people that can give those testimonies. Unfortunately, the person I thought that would be here today a few weeks ago said they would not be available. But again, to tie in the Easter story and Easter message with gift of life is such a powerful illustration, I hope, that you will see with me today as well. Especially the story that I read for you just a few moments ago, for me, is so powerful. It's actually, again, I say this often, I realize, but one of my favorite stories in all the scripture is this story right here called The Road to Emmaus. And it's the story that takes place on that Easter Sunday later in the day after his tomb was found empty and the angels announced his resurrection. But Luke's gospel is filled with journeys. It's filled with these moments of travel, of going from one place to another. In fact, if you think about it, Luke's gospel begins with a journey of an unwed, pregnant teenage mother and her fiancé who were traveling to a little town called Bethlehem. It begins with this journey, and from there, of course, their own son, Jesus, goes on a journey as he goes to the Jordan River to be baptized by John, and then a journey out into the wilderness where for 40 days and 40 nights he was without food or water, and he was tempted. And then he goes on a journey to go back to Galilee to proclaim the gospel. And the whole time Jesus on these journeys to Capernaum and journeys to Gazarean, and he's on a journey to Samaria, and he's on a journey to Jericho, and finally he's on a journey to Jerusalem. and a journey to the cross. And so in so many ways, Luke's gospel is about this understanding of a journey. And whether you are aware or not, you and I are all on a journey, right? Life is that. Life is a journey. Life is a stroll. Life is a walk, a drive. Life is always moving through. And the beauty of our own church's name is an understanding that we are on a journey together. A journey of what? Faith. And that journey is so important. And why I love this story that Luke ends with, the last story in Luke's gospel, it happens in this moment in so many ways. It's called the road to Emmaus. And we're told that these two disciples, and this again is such an incredible thing, I hope you understand today. These two disciples are traveling from Jerusalem to a place 7 miles away called Emmaus. They're on the road to Emmaus. But can I tell you something this morning that I hope not to mess up your biblical view of geography, but there is no Emmaus. There is no Emmaus on the map. There's none. It's not there. For years, of course, because some people can't handle the tension of the unknown and realizing, again, the Bible is about the book of faith, not getting stuck on the facts. They've been looking for Emmaus, and there's about 9 different places, 7 miles outside Jerusalem, that people have said, oh, that must be Emmaus. But all I can tell you is that on no map from that time period or ever before is there a place outside Jerusalem, 7 miles, called Emmaus. Emmaus isn't there geographically, but it's there theologically. And also know this today, that the two disciples who are talking, we don't even know who they are. We're told one's name is Cleopas. Exactly. When's the last time you saw Saint Cleopas? Or Cleopas? I mean, he's unknown. He doesn't exist anywhere else but in this one story. And he's talking to someone that we never know their name. Now some might be troubled by that, but I'm affirmed by that. Because what Luke is doing for us is, in essence, it's not that they're on a trip to nowhere and they are nobody, but they're on a trip to anywhere and they are anybody. In other words, they're you and me, and they're on a journey, and they're walking together. And here's the amazing part, that as they walk, they're talking about what has happened, and there's 4 words that appear that are ones that can be so true for all of us. Go down the slide, I think, maybe if I didn't put it there, though. What's next? Nope, don't do that there. It's just not there. I forgot to add this one slide. But there's 4 words that come up in verse 21, I believe it is, where they're walking with someone that they don't realize who he is. And they use these 4 words as they tell about what happened to Jesus, how he was crucified, died, and supposedly something may have happened, but they say, but we had hoped. But we had hoped. That idea of hope is past tense. In other words, they had lost what? Hope. They had since lost their hope because the one they had put their hopes on, as far as they still believed, was still dead. We had hoped. Not we have hope, but we had it. But guess what? Somewhere along this journey, we what? We lost it. We don't have it with us anymore. We had hope. What happens to us in life when we lose hope? What happens to our dreams when they've been dashed on the rocks? Or as Langston Hughes asked in his own poem, Harlem, what happens to a dream deferred? What happens to our hopes when our hopes feel crushed and lost in that way? What happens to each and every one of us? And here they are, these two, and just again, watch this. They're on a path, and I should note this for you, that although Emmaus is not a place on a map, the word Emmaus means warm springs or healing springs. And so again, like we understand places that have that spring water, that warm water, a place to go and be healed. It would seem they were traveling somewhere to be healed after they had been hurt. But yet they weren't quite living in the moment, because walking with them was who? Jesus. And they didn't what? Recognize him. They didn't see that God was right there. And how often for each of us, whether we are living in the pain of the past or walking towards a future of fear, we forget to live in the moment. We forget to look around and see where God is right now. We forget to understand that where we are, God still is. Now, the amazing part in this story, because I'm not going to stay in this story much longer, is that when do they finally recognize it's him? When Jesus took the bread and broke it. Suddenly, in the breaking of bread, they see it's Jesus. And Jesus, again, meets them where? On the journey. Now, I'm going to just go off script for a second here. And you know what I would have done? If I had been crucified by some folks and you brought me back from the dead, the first people I'm going to go see, right? Anyone else going with me? Seriously, the first people I'm going to see is who? The people who crucified you. And I'm going to handle something, right? Open up right? But that's the amazing thing when you think about it. Jesus didn't go back to the temple where he'd been teaching. He didn't go to this one place, but he joined them on a journey, on a walk. And that's, again, where God meets us. God meets us on our everyday walk. God meets us in those everyday moments of life where God is. And that's the Easter message, that God is always around us and God is moving and making things happen. And Easter has to be lived every day. To know how, because of Easter, we should always keep that hope that God will make a change, that God will make a flip, make a turn, that the disciples here even refuse to see of what God will do. Now, many of you know my story. I want to go a little deeper today, if I may, just to share about my life and what I've learned about God through life and through death. Again, as you may know, go down the slide, please. This is me when I was a few months old, maybe almost a year or so old. That's me, the mess. Again, I was born on July 26, 1970. And when I was born, I was diagnosed with disease cystic fibrosis. In fact, if you go down the slide, one of the reasons I was diagnosed at birth is my sister there on my left shoulder, who I talked about last Sunday. My sister Kathleen was very ill, very sick as a baby, and they didn't know what was wrong with her, but she couldn't gain weight. She was always sick and irritable and coughing, and finally my grandmother was watching Phil Donahue, and Phil Donahue did a show on cystic fibrosis, and my grandmother, who's 99, will be 100 in December, was watching Phil Donahue, and she called my mother, and she said, Kathleen has cystic fibrosis. And sure enough, they tested my sister, and she had it. And so she was a year old when she was diagnosed. I came along 4 months after diagnosis, and because she had it, there was a chance I would have it too. And as I like to say, our family hit the jackpot. A child born of two carriers of the disease has a 25% chance of having the disease. And both my sister and I were born with this disease. Now, although the doctors had given my parents a horrible prognosis that went along with the diagnosis, because again, they said I wouldn't live to see kindergarten. My parents refused to buy into that. They refused to believe. They believed that the doctors can give you a diagnosis, let God give you the prognosis. Amen? And my parents were determined to raise both my sister and I as quote-unquote normal and healthy as they could. And so I was very blessed and fortunate. I was taught that you have to know what you're up against, but don't make any excuses for why you don't give it your best. And so this was me. Go down the slide, please. As I graduated from college in 1992 from Wittenberg University, and that is my dad's side of the family, posing with me there on the right. And then go down the slide. I felt called to the ministry, went to seminary in Philadelphia, Lutheran Theological Seminary, and graduated in 1996. Now, all along, I need to share with you, right before, in fact, that picture was taken, my health began to decline. And by 1995, my lungs, which is what cystic fibrosis destroys, is your lungs. And your lungs become hard as a rock. And so it's like trying to breathe with two rocks in your chest. By 1995, I was down to 20% breathing on my test and was told that the only hope, that word again, that I had was to receive a double lung transplant. And I shared before, again, I don't want to go back to all that I went through, but I had a very rare illness, infection in my lungs that no antibiotic could fight. And because of that, University of Pittsburgh would not transplant me. Chapel Hill, North Carolina said they wouldn't transplant me. Stanford University said they wouldn't transplant me. The Cleveland Clinic said they wouldn't transplant me. And so I could not find a center willing to transplant me, to take that risk, until my doctor in Cleveland called a friend in St. Louis and said, basically, listen, I have a young man. He's got this infection, but I want you to meet him and give him a chance. And so I flew out to St. Louis. They evaluated me, and they basically said, you know what? We shouldn't do this, but we're going to put you on the transplant list. And I've said before, 3 months after I got listed, that infection disappeared. It was just gone, or healed, as I like to say. And so from there, though, my condition continued to get worse. I was getting sicker and sicker. I graduated from seminary in 1996. I was on disability. I was on public welfare the whole time just to get by. I went on oxygen. And go down the slide for me, please. In fact, this was me not too long before the transplant. My friend Kwan Hai Chi, UCC pastor, was ordained, and that is one of the last things I went to publicly before I got even sicker. But you can just see from the picture there what had happened to me, as I probably weighed 100 to 105 pounds at that point. And then eventually St. Louis called, and that's me saying goodbye to my sister, Mariah, who is now 32 with her own child. And I was called to go to St. Louis as I was high enough on the transplant list. And then it happened. And go down the slide, please. On August the 6th, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri, I got a phone call at 4:19 in the morning. I'll never forget the exact time. And if you play it and box it and win, you have to tithe to the church, 4:19, right? I'm just saying, give me something, right? At 4:19, I got the phone call that somebody in Dubuque, Iowa, a family had lost a loved one. Someone had died. But in the moments of their death, the family had decided to donate their organs, to donate their heart, their lungs, their kidneys, their liver, their bones, their eyes, to donate their whole body was donated so that other people could live. And so on August 6, 1997, this person, and I wish I could tell you who they were. They've stayed anonymous. But this person's death, from their one death, for when they took their last breath, from that one person, the number of lives that were then saved, the number of people who were able to live again because of the gift of this one person. And I happen to be the recipient of their lungs. Their lungs were given to me. And as the surgeon told my mother, as they took my old lungs out, and they were horribly diseased. In fact, the doctor, it was about a 9-hour surgery total, but it took almost 3.5 hours just to get my right lung out. And after the surgeon got my right lung out, he came and took a break and went out to the waiting room and sat down. My mom was drinking a cup of coffee and told her he had never seen a lung so diseased before. It was so hard to get this lung out. Of course, my mother was like, shouldn't you go back in? Because he's got two lungs, that, but he had to take that moment to be there. But the surgeon told my mother that after they got my lungs out, and I was on the breathing machine, they put in these new lungs, that the new lungs fit inside of my chest cavity like a glove. Said that when he put them in, it's almost like they were just meant to be there. It just fit right in. And again, it's now been 20 years later. And part of what I hope we understand from this is two main things. But number one, and go down the slide, I'm going to show you the pretty. This is pretty, so just be careful. That's actually me. I actually lost my eyesight on the operating table because I had a stroke. So I couldn't really see, but my family who are sick, that's where I get it from, they said my chest looked like the arch. They made me hold up that arch next to me. I didn't know quite what was happening, but anyways, that's actually me. After this, probably about 2 weeks after surgery, and go down one more slide, you can see my beautiful chest, but you can actually see where they, that was a serious cut. When I used to go out in public, it was always such a raging scar, and people would ask, my God, what happened to you? And I told them, I got attacked by a shark, You should see the shark, right? But then I explained what it really was. But there's two things I just want you to consider today for you to understand about this. Number one is I don't know whose lungs these were. All right? I don't know. I don't know whose lungs these were. I don't know if my donor was male or female or transgender. I don't know if my donor was black or white or brown or Hispanic or Native American. I don't know if they were Christian, atheist. But I don't know what characteristics they carried, but I know this, that whoever they were, their lungs fit right here. And they keep on breathing. Which is part of what organ donation teaches us, how we're all human beings. How it brings us all, it doesn't matter what, it all comes together because we're all created in the image of God in the same. And with their last breath they took, I took my first breath. And about maybe 6 weeks, because you could imagine that was quite painful. That was me actually, but that was me a few weeks later. But about 6 weeks after the surgery, I could finally take my deepest breath, because the chest cavity didn't hurt as bad. And I remember I was standing outside. It was September. My transfer August 6th. It was early September. And I took in the deepest breath I had taken in years. And I can tell you today that when I took that deep breath, I felt the spirit of my donor. And all they said to me was, breathe. Just breathe. Which is the second thing I share with you today. There is life after death. There is life. the body dies. I mean, someday this body also will die. But we live. We live. We are eternal beings. We are spirits. We are souls within a body. And that's what the Easter message is. See, I got life because one person died, and out of love, they gave me these lungs. But we all have life because one person died. He died on a cross for you and for me. And because of his death, we all live. And we live today and forever, but I invite you to really live. To live Easter every day. To appreciate God every day. Every day, God is with us. Every day in this journey of life, God, somewhere, somehow, in the breaking of bread, in the sun shining, in the voice of a friend, somewhere, somewhere, God is there with us. And I've been so blessed because from that, I was able to be healed and went on to regain my strength and to actually walk and run again. And go down the slide, please. I got ordained in Detroit at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in 1998. That's my sister Kathleen and my good friend Pastor William from the Bronx. And then after that, my sisters, I got to spend more of my life with my sisters, Kathleen, Kanita, Mariah, and Sarah, who's in Cleveland, Ohio. And then I got to meet and marry. Hello. I mean, the most magnificent and marvelous woman I've ever met. I'm not going to talk about who you've met, who I ever met, in Michelle. And, of course, we got a Labradoodle named Hershey. That was our first baby. You can see when we first got him, they grew into this massive dog. And we've lived our life together. And then God blessed us with Zanaya. That's when she first came to live with us. And I never, ever thought I would have a child call me Dad. But because of what happened, that death in life, I have my daughter came to be with us that we adopted. And then, of course, this little one was sent to us not long after, as this is Zachary, who came to be with us as well. And from there, you know, Zachary is just two handfuls, as his love of superheroes. And that's him with Hershey. They bonded very well as well over time. Although, please, Hershey's been so patient. And then that's my daughter wanted a sister. And so she still dresses Zachary up in her wigs and the like from time to time. Or he still has his football jersey underneath, but he put his wig on. And that's them. And we were blessed. That's our family together meeting Spider-Man on vacation. And then I was permitted on this journey to come to be here at Journey of Faith. But all of that happened. All of that has happened because of one person's death and decision to give life. And so every day, and I'm not perfect at this, but every day I try to live my life in such a way that appreciates this gift, that appreciates every breath that I can take. But it's not, again, because of August 6, 1997, but it really is because of what Jesus did on the cross, on that place called Calvary, where he chose to give his life, to be willing to have done to him what was done. He gave it all so we might live. And so on this journey, Jesus joins us. Jesus meets us. And Jesus invites us to live Easter every day and know that Jesus is risen. Alleluia. Jesus is risen. Alleluia. One more time like you mean it. Jesus is risen. Alleluia. Let's give God our thanks and praise.